We're beginning our next unit that is called Expressions and Equations. And expressions and equations is kind of your first glimpse at algebra. And algebra is this type of math that throws in letters and numbers and puts them together, and sometimes it can be a little confusing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the terms and vocabulary that you're going to need to know in order to help us be able to talk about expressions and equations. Okay, well the first thing is when we talk about expressions and equations, basically the only difference between an expression and an equation that's important to you now is that expressions do not have equal signs and equations do have equal signs. They're both mathematical sentences that contain variables and numbers and factors and that help us solve problems. Okay? So, like I said, an expression doesn't have an equal sign, and it contains letters that are known as variables, okay, and other numbers and operators like addition and subtraction. Okay, so I'm going to put up an example of an expression. Okay, this is an example of an expression. It's just a mathematical sentence, okay? Just like in language arts you have sentences in language. Well, in math we have sentences as well, and this would be an example of a sentence in math, okay? This says 6b plus 3. Okay, well, before we even begin to learn how to solve things like this and use expressions to solve problems, first we have to be able to talk about it. And one of the words that we need to talk about is the word terms, okay? Expressions are made up of terms, okay? That's one of the things they're made out of. How you identify terms is by separating the expression at its addition and subtraction signs. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to find the addition sign, and I'm just going to draw a big line through the expression. So my addition sign is right here, and I always draw my line right in front of that addition sign. So whenever I see an expression, the first thing I do is I separate the expression into terms by finding the addition or subtraction signs and drawing a line between them. Okay? Well, what we've done is that we have actually separated into its terms. Okay? This is a term, and this is a term. Okay? And within these terms, we use things like variables. Okay? Variables are letters or symbols that represent a number that we don't know yet. Okay, it could be any number, okay? But since we don't know the number, we represent it with a letter. Okay, so this says 6b, and this kind of looks like another 6, so you got to be careful when you're writing. So make sure that when you write these, you're writing them neatly. But this says 6b. Well, b is a letter. Why is a letter in math? It's because we don't know the number that b is. Okay, and we call that a variable. So this is a variable. This is a variable. Okay? The next thing is a coefficient. Okay? A coefficient is the constant number in front of a variable in a term. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we find a term, this is a term, and the coefficient is the constant number in front of the variable. So this is our variable, and this is the constant number. The reason we call it a constant is because it's never going to change. It's always going to be a 6 in this case. Okay? Another constant in this mathematical sentence is this 3. Okay, this 3 is never going to change. But this constant is special because it's in front of a variable. Okay, so we call this constant a coefficient. Okay, a coefficient is just the number in front of a variable in a term in an expression. Okay, the next thing is what we call factors. Okay, and factors are just like you've talked about before maybe, or maybe you remember when you talked about multiplying numbers together. Okay, so if you took 3 times 2, okay, this is a factor, and this is a factor of 6, right? Okay, if I asked you what are the factors of 6, what makes 6? One way that you can make 6 is take 3 times 2, and each of these is a factor. Another way to make 6 would be 1 times 6, and we would call both of these factors. Okay? Well, factors in an expression are also things that are being multiplied together. Okay? These are being multiplied together. So, whenever you see a number right next to a variable, just like 6 is right next to the letter B, okay? These are factors because if we were to plug in a number, and we'll learn about this later, but if we decided that B was going to be 2, okay? We decided that B was going to be 2, and I'm going to erase this. So instead of writing 6B, we would write 6, and we put 2 in parentheses, plus 3. When a number is right next to the letter, or a number is right next to a number in parentheses, we multiply those, which is why these are called factors. Okay, so if B equaled 2, and we plugged 2 in for B, okay, we would take 6 times 2, and then we would, which equals 12, and then we would add 3, which is 15. Okay? So this is an expression, and expressions are mathematical sentences, okay? And mathematical sentences that are split into terms, okay? Terms, 6b is a term and 3 is a term, so this expression had 2 terms. Expressions also have variables, okay? Variables, letters that stand for numbers that we don't know yet, okay? There's also coefficients, which is the constant number in front of the variable in a term, in an expression. And there's also factors, okay? This is a factor and this is a factor because we're going to multiply those together, okay? Now, let's look at another expression. And this is going to be a little bit bigger expression. Okay, so we have 2x plus 3b plus 4a plus 7. Okay? The first thing we do when we're trying to figure out where are the terms, where are the variables, where are the coefficients, where are the factors, is we identify the terms. Okay, and the first thing I do is draw a line, or I find the plus or minus signs. Okay? And I'm actually going to change this to a minus sign just to make my point. So change that in your notes, please. Okay? But first thing I do is find the plus and minus signs. So here's a plus sign. I'm going to draw a big line right in front of it. Here's another plus sign. Draw a line in front of it. Here's a minus sign. Draw a line in front of it. Okay? So how many terms are in this expression? There are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Okay, so this expression had 4 terms. This is a term, this is a term, this is a term, and this is a term. Okay? Now, we want to find the variables. Variables are letters that stand for numbers. So this x is a variable. this b is a variable. This a is a variable. And there's no variables in that term. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is find the coefficients, which are the numbers in front of the variables. This number is right in front of a variable. This is a coefficient. This number is right in front of a variable. This is another coefficient. This number is right in front of a variable. This is a coefficient. And this does not have a coefficient because there's no variable here. The last thing is factors, things that are being multiplied together. Okay? Well, the 2, if we plugged in a number for x, we would multiply 2 times whatever number that was. So these are both factors because they're being multiplied together. These are both factors because they would be multiplied together if we plugged in a number for b. These are both factors because if we plugged in a number for a, we would multiply 4 times a. Okay, so that's what expressions are. And that's what terms, variables, coefficients, and factors are. So in this expression, there were 4 terms. There were 1, 2, 3 variables. There were 1, 2, 3 coefficients. And there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factors. So when we have expressions, okay, this is the vocabulary we need to know and use to be able to communicate when we talk about expressions.